and welcome to the next part of the lesson Mother's Day. Now, in the previous part, we saw how Mrs. Fitzgerald taught a lesson to both the son and the daughter. Now, it's time for the entry of her husband, Mr. George Pearson. Now, likewise, the children, Mr. George Pearson was also shocked at his wife's behavior. He was about 50 years old and considered himself as a very important person. He gets annoyed at his wife who was sipping beer. Excuse me. When he enters, he tells her that he does not want any tea as he has to go to the club for supper. His wife tells him that she had not prepared any tea anyways. At this, George gets annoyed that his wife was not bothered about him. Annie continues to rebuke him, telling him that he was not respected in the club where he kept going every day. She tells him that people at the bar in the club called him Pompey Ompy Pearson due to his self-important behavior. George cannot believe that Annie says and confirms. What Annie says he is not able to believe and confirms the truth from his son Cyril. Unfortunately, Cyril too agrees to the same. So Mr. George is crestfallen. He feels very bad. The place where he goes every day, he's made fun of in that particular place. Annie tells her son that sometimes it does people good to have their feelings hurt. On hearing a knock, Cyril checks who it is and reports to Annie that it was Mrs. Fitzgerald, the next door neighbor. But in reality, it is the real Mrs. Pearson. Mrs. Fitzgerald, presently Fitzgerald, enters and finds Doris in tears. Her family continues to get a scolding in front of her too. From whom? Mrs. Pearson. That is the real Fitzgerald. So informs her that she was putting everyone in their place. So Mrs. Fitzgerald informs Mrs. Pearson, the real Pearson, that she was putting everyone in their place. When Mr. George Pearson shouts at his wife, she threatens to slap his big, fat, silly face. Now this was too much for real Annie to handle. Okay, and she really gets disturbed and wants everyone to leave as she wants to talk in private with Annie, that is real Fitzgerald. She tells Mrs. Fitzgerald that it was enough and they should change back and get into their true selves. Mrs. Fitzgerald again speaks some magic words and they revert to their own selves. Mrs. Fitzgerald says that she enjoyed every moment in her changed personality, and Annie remarks that she did not enjoy this changeover. Mrs. Fitzgerald warns Annie not to be soft with their family once again, and she warns her to remain firm. Annie says that she will be able to manage her husband and children now. But the neighbor again warns her not to give any apology or explanation, otherwise they would start again treating her in the same manner. She must wear a tough look and talk to them rudely if she wants them to behave in the right manner. For a change, when Annie smiles, her family members smile back and feel relaxed. Now this happens after Mrs. Fitzgerald is, she has left the place. So when she smiles, her family smiles back. As they had cancelled going out, Doris didn't go with Charlie Spence, Cyril didn't go out, and George didn't go to the club. So Annie feels that they all as a family should play a game of rummy. She also asks her children to prepare supper for the family, for which they readily agree. She also wants to have a talk with George, her husband, for which again everybody agrees. So the play ends on a happy note where the children and husband are willing to do whatever Mrs. Annie Pearson suggests. So what is the moral of the story? Do not show respect to your mother only on Mother's Day. Mothers are not the ones to be ignored. They are the ones to whom you should worship. Okay, so I hope you have understood. Thank you.